In 1914, Miami was little more than a fledgling outpost, a rugged outpost hugging Florida's southeastern shoreline where wetlands converged with the ocean and insects far outpaced the human inhabitants. The whole place boasted under 10,000 dwellers. Many roads remained dirt tracks. The railway had pulled in just 18 years prior. It was into this lush, wild expanse that James Daring ventured, one of the nation's richest eligible men harboring an audacious dream. He aimed to erect a grand Italian Renaissance estate, not amid the elite enclaves of Newport, rife with tycoons vying for prestige, nor in New York, where opulent Gilded Age estates lined Fifth Avenue in marble splendor. Instead, right here, amid Miami's raw, overgrown terrain bordering Biscayne Bay, where nobody had dared to pursue anything even vaguely similar to his bold conception. Vizcaya required 8 years to finish. During its height, the project hired out 10% of the city's total populace. Artisans from Europe sailed over to craft ornamental details suited to Tuscan villas, not subtropical bogs. Heirlooms and structural features were freighted in from Italy, France, and Spain, relocated to an environment utterly foreign to their creators' wildest thoughts. James Daring savored his masterpiece for scarcely 5 years before mortality overtook him. The residence that demanded almost 10 years of labor housed its architect for only a sliver of that span. An unwed tycoon's lavish reverie, finalized precisely when it could flicker as a short-lived splendor prior to slipping into obscurity. Yet Vizcaya withstood tempests that ought to have demolished it, endured eras of abandonment and deterioration. Despite the subtropical environment's unyielding barrage on imported European substances ill-suited to such rigors, the mansion stands as a monument to a single individual's unyielding resolve to forge splendor without concession, heedless of practicality, expense, or context. This narrative captures that resolve, the deployment of riches not toward societal rivalry, but toward a magnate's creative ambition. He constructed not for heirs or enduring fame, lacking both spouse and offspring, but purely because he envisioned the exceptional and commanded the means to bring it to life. James Daring's Vizcaya, an Italian reverie emerging from Miami's verdant wilds, a solitary man's haven that evolved into a municipal gem. James Daring, heir to a harvesting empire. James Daring inherited his wealth without lifting a finger for it. He entered the world amid it, born in 1859 in South Paris, Maine, as the second son of William Daring, a figure who reshaped U.S. farming and amassed one of the era's premier industrial empires during the Gilded Age. William began in retail dry goods, yet spotted the promise in agricultural innovation. He poured funds into the Marsh Harvester firm, seized command, and rebranded it the Deering Harvester Company. The enterprise William forged transformed the reaping of crops. His inventions enabled growers to gather vastly greater yields of grain using far fewer hands. As U.S. farmland stretched across the western plains, Deering harvesters trailed in their wake. The firm's triumphs mirrored the nation's farming surge, expanding side by side into the late 1800s. By 1902, William Daring consolidated his outfit with rivals, among them the McCormick Harvesting Machine Company, birthing International Harvester. The resulting powerhouse ruled the field of farm machinery production. That consolidation catapulted the Deering clan into immense prosperity. Accounts from the time indicate James's portion of the inheritance topped $20 million, over $500 million in modern terms. James contributed to the familial enterprise, occupying high-level roles at International Harvester, though his passion lay elsewhere, beyond factory oversight. His elder sibling, Charles, shouldered the bulk of day-to-day operations. James showed up for director sessions and weighed in on key choices as needed, but as his affluence grew, he pivoted toward personal pursuits that rendered hands-on leadership obsolete. What captivated James above all was refinement, fine arts, building design, symphonies, exquisite artifacts. He journeyed widely across the continent, honing a refined palette and amassing expertise in Renaissance and Baroque aesthetics and forms. He amassed canvases, statues, ornamental pieces. His learning mirrored that of an aficionado, attuned to true excellence beyond mere lavish spending. James stayed unmarried. During a time when affluent gentlemen were pressed to found lineages through suitable unions and sire successors to steward inherited estates, James steadfastly chose solitude. The motivations stay elusive to some degree. Certain period reports allude to romances that stalled short of wedlock. Alternative views propose he cherished autonomy, averse to the concessions matrimony demanded. His unmarried life proved odd enough to spark rumors and chatter within Chicago's upper circles. Affluent bachelors faced whispers of concealed flaws or views as somehow deficient. Still, James's fortune and standing let him brush aside such judgments. Such demands held no sway over him. He existed on his own terms, answerable solely to his inner drive. Entering his 50s, James had attained all the markers of traditional accomplishment, save for offspring. His fortune knew no bounds, his standing in society was secure, his appreciation for the arts profound, and his Chicago residence overflowed with masterpieces and heirlooms. Even with his reduced role in commerce, admiration followed him in professional realms. Still, a void persisted, one that defied societal expectations. James yearned to forge an enduring creation beyond mere commercial inheritance, which his sibling Charles would oversee. Not a lineage of heirs, for he had none, but a masterpiece of art that would endure beyond his days. A sanctuary to meld his insights on aesthetics, architecture, and artistry into tangible reality. Resources abounded for him, expertise filled his mind, leisure came courtesy of his riches, unshackled from corporate obligations. All that remained was an ideal site and the vitality to bring his dream to life. In 1912, a revelation arrived that reshaped his world. The verdict, tuberculosis, a terror that gripped the nation at the time. The remedy outlined was straightforward, yet unyielding. A consistently mild, arid atmosphere throughout the seasons. The biting Chicago chills, which he had braved for years, now posed a lethal risk. The affliction endangering his existence would, in time, ignite his true calling. James Daring had to depart Chicago in pursuit of balmy air where respiration came easy. And amid that quest for wellness, he unearthed the spot where his creative aspirations could solidify into stone and space. The affluent single man stood on the cusp of his fate in the least expected haven. Not amid Europe's storied elegance, where he had immersed himself for years, not within America's polished metropolises, already steeped in refinement and grace. Rather, in Miami, a raw outpost teetering on the edge of untamed lands, where no endeavor akin to his bold idea had yet dared to rise. The diagnosis and the unveiling of Miami. Pernicious anemia in 1912 carried grave weight, though far from the inevitable doom it spelled mere decades prior. For affluent individuals like James Daring, it heralded sweeping alterations to daily existence. Yet, with diligent oversight, vitality could persist for an extended span. The ailment impaired the bloodstream's capacity to generate robust red cells, leading to exhaustion, lassitude, and dire risks if ignored. Physicians recognized that constant vigilance was essential, yet sufferers could sustain decent well-being via meticulous treatment and, vitally, a suitable setting. Guidance for James aligned without deviation. Balmy weather, abundant light, repose, and minimized tension. The disorder flourished amid chill, moisture-laden conditions. Chicago's relentless frosts clashed with any viable strategy for pernicious anemia. Relocation to a perpetually temperate haven was imperative, allowing ease of living alongside vigilant care. This pronouncement compelled James to overhaul his existence from the ground up. Approaching his 50s, his wealth was immeasurable, his palate for elegance honed by years of continental journeys and acquisitions. Now, he sought a sunlit refuge to uphold the grandeur his background and assets enabled. But to where? The Golden State drew the elite chasing warmth, yet its distance from eastern ties felt prohibitive. The arid Southwest promised heat, but scant refinement or community. Florida emerged as a compelling option, temperate across the calendar, reachable from the Atlantic seaboard, surging in growth, though in 1912 much of it remained wild expanse. Swamps, thickets, and barren shores dominated the peninsula. James toured Miami circa 1912 to gauge its promise. he encountered a settlement scarcely worthy of the term city. Incorporation had occurred just 16 years before, in 1896. Its steady populace hovered near 5,000 souls, ballooning modestly in winter as Yankees fled the frost. Henry Flagler's Florida East Coast Railway had arrived in 1896, granting access but not polish. Roads stayed largely dirt-tracked, structures leaned toward humble timber builds, suited to the heat but devoid of grandeur. A handful of inns served seasonal guests, a basic central area existed, yet none evoked the cultured bustle of Chicago, New York, or Old World capitals. Miami's allure lay elsewhere, raw, vibrant wilderness. Biscayne Bay gleamed in vivid blue, untouched and serene. Lush flora thrust skyward with fierce vitality. The air stayed gentle year-long, muggy over parched, yet a vast improvement on Chicago's grip, and property awaited claim. Endless ribbons of empty shorefront beckoned to a dreamer backed by means, ripe for innovation without precedent. James spied potential. The outpost's immaturity posed no hindrance, it granted liberty. In locales like Newport or Palm Beach, he'd construct amid entrenched opulence. His dwelling would stand against pre-existing estates. Yet in Miami, he stood a chance to lead the way. He could set new benchmarks instead of merely matching existing ones. The untamed surroundings provided an empty slate for his ideas to flourish freely. He started purchasing land along Biscayne Bay, just south of Miami's unassuming city center. The property featured stunning waterfront vistas stretching over the bay. However, it also consisted of wild mangrove thickets and thick tropical forests, terrain that demanded substantial work to become suitable for construction. While others might have viewed it as daunting barriers, James perceived opportunities. The gap between the current reality and his imagined outcome was vast. Back in 1912, Miami functioned as a remote frontier settlement, lacking robust infrastructure, experienced laborers, and any legacy of refined building design. James planned to construct an Italian Renaissance villa, incorporating European artistry, overseas supplies, and decorative schemes that could compete with the finest estates in Newport or Long Island's Gold Coast. The undertaking was immense. Virtually everything had to be sourced from afar or fabricated on site. Expert artisans would have to travel from Europe or northern regions. Supplies would require transport from remote origins. Erecting a Renaissance palazzo amid tropical wilds appeared ridiculous by traditional measures. Still, James possessed edges beyond his fortune. His diagnosis of pernicious anemia, though grave, had released him from corporate duties. It allowed him to invest years into this endeavor without competing priorities. As a single man, he faced no spouse doubting the sense of erecting a grand residence in a marshy area, no offspring whose legacy could be depleted on whimsical building pursuits. By 1912, Miami was showing initial hints of the surge that would reshape it in the coming years. Property investors were trickling in. Funds from the north were starting to spot Florida's promise. Carl Fisher was initiating work on Miami Beach on the opposite shore. The area was on the brink of rapid expansion, even if most overlooked it then. James's arrival aligned ideally. He secured top-tier bayfront acreage at fair prices by coming early. His assets could hasten Miami's progress via his building initiative. Moreover, he introduced elegance that would elevate the locale's artistic goals, proving that high-caliber design could thrive in such a raw environment. The health setback that upended his routine was evolving into the spark for his most notable success. James Deering would forge something revolutionary in Miami's wilds, an Italian villa emerging from the jungle foliage, a Renaissance palace beside Biscayne Bay. A single man's aspiration brought to life via riches, foresight, and the resolve born of uncertain vitality. He had selected his spot. Next came gathering the experts to turn dreams into tangible form. The land was bought. The idea was solidifying. James required an architect attuned to his European sensibilities, capable of tailoring them to tropical demands, along with creators for interiors that could match Europe's best in Italy or France. That quest would guide him to ideal partners, individuals who echoed his creative drive and held the expertise to craft Renaissance magnificence amid Florida's harsh weather. The idea began to solidify, an Italian villa amid the tropics. James Deering was clear on his rejections. He rejected the typical tropical bungalow style prevalent in Florida design. He avoided Spanish colonial revival, despite its rising popularity in the South, and he absolutely shunned the crude wooden edifices that served as buildings in Miami. Instead, he sought an Italian Renaissance villa, akin to the palazzos he had examined over decades in Florence, Rome, and Venice. Built of stone with intricate ornamentation, spacious formal areas organized around patios, landscaped gardens that blended seamlessly with the structure, the harmonious fusion of artwork, building, and surroundings seen in Italy's premier rural properties. This ambition was bold for several factors. Italian villas suited the Mediterranean's climate, scorching, arid summers paired with gentle, rainy winters. South Florida brought steamy, muggy summers and balmy, damp winters, plus fierce tropical storms unknown to those Mediterranean designs. Substances ideal for Italy, like limestone, stucco, and terracotta, confronted entirely new stresses in Miami's intense environment. Yet, James refused to yield to logistical hurdles. He had devoted years to honing his sense of beauty. He understood exemplary architecture's appearance, operations, and triumphs. His plan for Vizcaya, the title he drew from Spanish roots, rejected concessions or modifications. It aimed to deliver genuine Renaissance excellence, no matter the site or weather obstacles. The idea developed via discussions with architects and decorators, but its essence stayed true to James. The residence would facing Biscayne Bay. The main chambers would be positioned to take advantage of panoramic vistas and gentle winds. The design would revolve around a central courtyard in true Italian tradition, offering pathways for movement and a sheltered outdoor area shielded from weather extremes. Rather than a grand palazzo, the structure would embody a villa aesthetic, imposing yet understated, tailored for the ease of a single gentleman's daily life instead of family legacy display. Proportions were thoughtfully calibrated. James sought not the grandest dwelling in the nation, but the most elegant, the most sophisticated, the most genuinely Italian. It needed to be spacious enough for lavish gatherings and showcasing his treasures, yet cozy enough to serve as a welcoming home for one man and his visitors. The facade would draw from Italian Renaissance models, masonry on the ground levels, plaster higher up, a loggia delivering shaded retreats with bay views. Balconies and terraces would blend indoors with outdoors seamlessly. The rooftop would maintain a modest, level profile, differing from the towering silhouettes of Newport estates, as Italian villas extend outward rather than rise dramatically. James pictured the residence nestled amid ornate formal gardens, not lush tropical ones suited to the locale, but classic European layouts modified for Florida's environment. Parterres, fountains, statues, and structural features would reflect the same dedication to continental elegance that shaped the building. Inside, the spaces would highlight James's display areas, crafted to fit particular artifacts, with ceilings, dimensions, and ornamentation that enhanced rather than overshadowed the decor and artworks. This was no domicile where the structure dominated its contents. Instead, it created a cohesive ambiance where design, furnishings, and collections merged into harmonious artistic expressions. James insisted on genuine materials everywhere, imported Italian marble over local imitations, authentic European period pieces instead of copies, and salvaged components from genuine Renaissance edifices where feasible, lending Vizcaya an aura of timeless maturity rather than the starkness of fresh builds. The residence ought to evoke centuries of gradual development despite its construction spanning under 10 years. Realizing this concept in Miami posed formidable technical hurdles. Suitable stone had to be brought in from afar, with no nearby quarries yielding fitting stone. Artisans skilled in Renaissance-level embellishments were absent locally. They would have to come from Europe or northern U.S. hubs. Even foundational building supplies and techniques demanded overhaul for the humid tropics. Yet, James held a decisive edge. Vast wealth, dividends from international harvester, supplied boundless funds. He could transport resources from any corner of the globe. He could compensate European experts generously to decamp to Miami briefly. He could test building methods repeatedly until they succeeded in the balmy surroundings. The idea crystallizing in James's imagination, amounted to fully relocating Italian Renaissance style to Florida, without alterations, without concessions, but forging the authentic article in an incongruous spot via unyielding resolve and fiscal power. Such an ambition was feasible solely through immense fortune and refined artistic insight that rendered it appealing. Initial drawings started converting the idea into tangible plans. The layout would center on that courtyard. The bay-oriented facade would feature the loggia and key rooms. The inland approach would be more stately, serving as the ceremonial portal for arriving company. Utility areas would be tactfully isolated, permitting the solitary routine James desired while enabling the opulent hospitality the estate would host. James was crafting not merely a home, but an encompassing milieu. The architecture, landscapes, and shoreline would unite into a seamless whole, with the built form bridging old-world heritage and the vibrant subtropical backdrop. By orthodox measures, it was unattainable, precisely the sort of endeavor that James's riches, learning, and tenacity were primed to conquer. He possessed the property. He possessed the blueprint. Now, he required the experts to bring it to life. The quest for an architect and specialists able to realize this audacious ideal would decide if Vizcaya emerged as a triumph or just a costly misadventure. Gathering the crew, Hoffman and Suarez, James Deering required partners who could align with his aspirations. Erecting an Italian Renaissance villa amid Miami's tropics demanded more than standard builders. He sought creators versed in European heritage, endowed with ingenuity to tailor it to novel conditions. His pursuit uncovered two individuals whose joint expertise would enable Vizcaya: F. Burrell Hoffman Jr. serving as architect, and Diego Suarez handling landscape architecture. Yet, the narrative surrounding Vizcaya's design collective proved far more intricate than mere occupational ties. At its heart stood Paul Chalfin, destined to serve as James Deering's most trusted partner and the imaginative force driving the whole endeavor. Chalfin emerged as an atypical presence in the realm of early 1900s aesthetics. After attending Harvard, he honed his skills as an artist at the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris, immersing himself in the stringent traditional training that molded Europe's premier builders. Still, Chalfin's passions stretched well past canvas work to embrace every facet of creative expression: structures, room layouts, ornamental crafts, outdoor settings. Rather than narrowing to one field, he acted as a discerning expert, grasping how components must harmonize to form cohesive aesthetic spaces. Chalfin enjoyed ties to Elsie de Wolfe, the trailblazing home stylist reshaping affluent Americans' views on domestic spaces. It was via de Wolfe that Chalfin encountered James Deering in 1910. Brought on initially to handle furnishings for James's Chicago home, the pair quickly forged a strong connection. Each had pursued studies abroad. Each recognized that crafting exceptional residences demanded more than gathering costly items. Each held firm that U.S. affluence could uphold continental creative ideals, provided it was steered by refined discernment. That same year of 1910, soon after their introduction, Chalfin and Deering launched the initial installment in a series of joint voyages to Europe. Far from the leisurely jaunts common among prosperous travelers, these outings functioned as deliberate investigations, gathering insights and artifacts that would later shape Vizcaya. They explored villas from the Renaissance era, examined layouts for gardens, consulted with vendors and artisans, and acquired building components along with decor pieces. Such ventures amounted to productive missions, laying the conceptual and tangible groundwork for the initiative in Florida. Over time, Chalfin's involvement grew past mere consultation or styling. He stepped into the role of creative overseer, the individual charged with converting James's broad concepts into precise choices for buildings and embellishments. James supplied the funding and guiding artistic outlook. Chalfin delivered the proficiency to realize that outlook with utmost excellence. Regarding the structural design, Chalfin suggested F. Burrell Hoffman Jr. Hoffman hailed from respected New York building networks, schooled in the Beaux-Arts method that prized timeless shapes and holistic planning approaches. He had contributed to major housing commissions and knew how to fashion dwellings that balanced livability with expressive artistry. Though Hoffman was in his 30s, younger than James, when Vizcaya's work commenced, He brought the engineering acumen required to address the distinctive hurdles of erecting edifices in southern Florida. The weather there diverged sharply from European or northern U.S. norms. Soaring moisture levels, scorching temperatures, fierce downpours, plus ground and flora that resisted imported building customs. Hoffman had to modify Renaissance-inspired styles to thrive in surroundings their originators could scarcely have foreseen. The partnership linking Chalfin and Hoffman proved vital to Vizcaya's triumph. Chalfin captured the conceptual essence, what the estate ought to evoke, its ties to historical European models. Hoffman mastered the engineering aspects, from frameworks and substances to assembly methods. No single member could have realized Vizcaya independently. United under James's direction and backing, they dared to pursue the audacious. For the grounds, Chalfin enlisted Diego Suarez, a Colombian specialist in structured landscaping with a keen grasp of symmetrical garden principles. Suarez confronted what might have been the group's toughest obstacle. Continental manicured gardens suited moderate weather with clear seasonal shifts. In contrast, southern Florida delivered unyielding warmth, dampness, sudden gales, and plants that expanded with wild vigor. Suarez aimed to fashion outdoor areas mimicking European elegance, featuring parterres, water features, statues, and built accents, yet relying on hardy tropical species suited to local rigors. The underlying conflict was profound, enforcing strict geometric order upon a terrain prone to lush disorder. The ensemble gathered by James Deering showcased a rare blend of abilities. Chalfin as the guiding artistic integrator, Hoffman as the hands-on builder, Suarez as the terrain shaper, and James as the benefactor, offering not only capital but informed critiques on creative choices. This dynamic transcended the standard patron-architect dynamic, where the funder merely endorses plans. James engaged deeply, his overseas learning and acquisition background positioning him as an active contributor instead of a detached buyer. The overseas excursions persisted into the early 1910s. With every expedition, they returned laden with additional treasures, structural remnants, vintage pieces, adornments, even full wall linings destined for integration into Vizcaya's scheme. In essence, they were constructing the residence prior to any groundwork, amassing the essentials and items. This method lent genuine authenticity to the project, avoiding the mere construction of a fresh structure adorned with store-bought relics. Such a strategy set Vizcaya apart from numerous modern American estates of the era. Estates like the Breakers in Newport were typically planned architecturally before being outfitted. In contrast, Vizcaya emerged as an integrated artistic endeavor where the building's form, inner spaces, decor, and surroundings developed in harmony. Although the undertaking proved more time-consuming and intricate, it yielded a unified outcome. By 1914, the group was prepared to commence building operations. They had devoted 4 years to preparation, study, and procurement. The land had been readied, the blueprints were finalized, the resources were gathered. James relied on his partners, each contributing vital skills to this groundbreaking venture. The bond between James and his creative associates, especially Chalfin, extended far beyond mere business ties. For years, they journeyed side by side, deliberated choices jointly, and embraced a common dream for Vizcaya's potential. As a perennial single man, James found in these professional alliances the camaraderie and mutual goals that others might derive from domestic bonds. Chalfin grasped James's essence like few could. He saw that Vizcaya transcended the notion of merely crafting an elegant residence. It embodied a tangible expression of all James had absorbed about aesthetics, design, and elegance from his extensive European sojourns. It represented a lasting creation that would endure beyond its maker's lifetime. For someone without heirs, Vizcaya stood as his enduring inheritance. The ensemble gathered around James Deering in the early 1910s possessed exceptional qualifications for the task at hand. Hoffman brought architectural prowess. Suarez offered mastery in landscaping. Chalfin supplied the imaginative insight and the close personal tie with James that fostered true artistic synergy. Over the subsequent 8 years, they would erect an achievement deemed improbable. A true Italian Renaissance villa emerging from Miami's lush subtropical expanse. Building efforts were imminent. the untamed terrain would be subdued. The concept, refined over years of strategizing and gathering, would at last materialize along Biscayne Bay. Through their European sourcing, they were essentially reviving a Renaissance epic. James Deering and Paul Chalfin went beyond erecting a modern dwelling and embellishing it with continental artifacts. Their goal was bolder, relocating genuine Renaissance and Baroque structures to Florida soil. The sourcing ventures that started in 1910 persisted into the mid-1910s, overlapping with the ongoing work in Miami. Chalfin and Deering roamed Italy, France, and Spain, hunting for structural components, ornamental items, and fittings to weave into Vizcaya's framework. These excursions resembled salvaging operations more than routine purchases. They were efforts to preserve shards of Europe's artistic legacy, breathing fresh vitality into them across the Atlantic. Early 20th century Europe presented rare chances for affluent U.S. enthusiasts. Declining noble lineages, strained by finances, were liquidating properties and scattering heirlooms. Structures faced razing or alteration, freeing up building parts. Conflicts and societal turmoil opened doors to items that stability might have kept hidden. Chalfin had cultivated ties with vendors, artisans, and go-betweens across the continent. He knew which Venetian supplier handled Renaissance stone pillars, which Florentine atelier could deliver period-authentic wrought iron, which French manor was under deconstruction and open to parting with its sculpted timber panels. This web of connections proved crucial for securing the caliber and genuineness James insisted upon. Their procurement philosophy was nuanced. They avoided merely snapping up the priciest or most striking finds. Instead, they chose elements that harmonized, united by visual principles, regardless of era or origin. A 16th century Italian ceiling might pair seamlessly with 18th century French pieces if both channeled classical ideals and comparable artisanal excellence. Structural features held special value. Stone pillars from Renaissance edifices, sculpted marble entrances and frames, ornate overhead timbers retaining their initial artwork, wrought iron portals and balustrades. These were no imitations or derivations. They were authentic originals, extracted from European sites and transported to Miami for integration into Vizcaya's framework. Sourcing demanded endurance and discernment. A tip on potential structural finds could entail weeks of scrutiny, assessing items for legitimacy and excellence, haggling costs with merchants or estate holders, and coordinating shipment from isolated Italian hamlets or rural French domains. These treasures were sourced from distant European ports, crossing the ocean to reach Miami. Among the purchases were whole chambers, including ornate ceiling schemes adorned with intricate carvings and paintings, plus paneling that once graced the walls of noble residences. Experts meticulously cataloged them, took them apart, packed them securely in crates, and transported them overseas. Back at Vizcaya, the pieces were reassembled with precision, occasionally modified to suit the emerging structure, yet always retaining their core essence and artisanal excellence. The furniture merited the same rigorous scrutiny. James and Chalfin hunted for items blending superior craftsmanship, genuine provenance, and suitability for Vizcaya's various spaces. Think Renaissance cassoni, those grand carved chests, along with opulent Baroque seating and tables or elegant French commodes and armoires. Every selection was assessed not only on its standalone value, but also on its role in the overarching decorative schemes under development. The assortment of decorative arts expanded to encompass pottery, fabrics, sculptures, artwork, and myriad lesser items. Delicate Italian maiolica, luxurious Spanish leather hangings, lavish Flemish tapestries. Such elements infused Vizcaya with the layered opulence of classic European settings, where no inch of wall or surface went without some captivating ornament. Chalfin was curating a trove that fulfilled diverse roles. The items had to be verifiable and aesthetically pleasing, aligning with James's refined discernment. They also served practical needs, offering fitting setups for everyday routines and social gatherings. Above all, they harmonized visually, forging unified atmospheres instead of mere scatterings of costly possessions. The volume of these procurements was immense. Records of shipments revealed countless crates docking in Miami during the build's duration. Certain loads carried massive structural components, Others safeguarded fragile furniture and ornaments. Coordinating the inventory, warehousing, and ultimate placement of it all demanded intricate management. The investment was formidable, even by James's lofty benchmarks. Reports from the era pegged the purchases at more than $1 million, excluding the building costs themselves. Trips abroad entailed not only the initial outlays, but shipping fees, duties, consultant charges, and the upkeep of a web of vendors and agents enabling these hauls. Expense, however, held little sway over James. His wealth rendered finances almost moot. The priorities were excellence and fidelity. If a structural feature suited Vizcaya ideally, its tag was incidental. This latitude let Chaffin chase rarities that peers might bypass as prohibitively pricey. The procurement strategy mirrored larger ideals for what Vizcaya represented. The estate aimed not for a flashy modern extravagance. Rather, it evoked a timeless patrician villa, shaped by successive eras of occupancy and enhancement. Faded masonry, heirloom furnishings, time-worn architectural details, all wove in an aura of layered legacy. There's a poignant contrast here. Vizcaya rose on a spot devoid of old-world roots. Early 1910s Miami was raw outpost, just a step from untamed nature. Still, James and Chaffin infused it with deep European legacies, embedding slivers of that heritage into a fresh edifice far from ancestral soils. These choices underscored James's foresight in crafting an enduring legacy. Unwed and without heirs, he designed not for family line, but for enduring impact. The artifacts chosen by him and Chaffin transcended mere domestic use. They stood as enduring relics, destined to linger at Vizcaya, narrating tales of continental artistry and transatlantic acquisitiveness well beyond their initial intents. As the build neared completion in the early 1920s, Vizcaya housed one of America's premier assemblages of European decorative arts. Smaller than some institutional holdings perhaps, but more unified, since each element was chosen to complement a defined spatial framework. The residence and its treasures merged into a seamless ensemble, every part amplifying the rest. The European sourcing venture showcased the triumphs of boundless means wedded to discerning aesthetics. James and Chaffin had essentially imported segments of Europe's artistic patrimony and pieced them anew in Florida. The outcome transcended a lavish dwelling stuffed with valuables. It emerged as a nuanced declaration on bridging Old World heritage with New World drive, realized through the authenticity that only genuine relics and substances could deliver. The Biscayne Bay plot stood prepared. The structural imports were secured, the interior appointments crafted and poised. At last, the true labor could commence, molding aspirations and gathered assets into tangible reality. Nestled amidst the lush tropical surroundings, the estate's grand architecture emerged triumphantly. The location itself subdued the untamed environment. The parcel that James Deering purchased on Biscayne Bay boasted remarkable natural splendor, yet posed formidable challenges due to its rugged state. In 1914, the area destined for Vizcaya's elegant gardens and Renaissance-style structures consisted of thick jungle foliage, mangrove thickets, and a rugged shoreline. Spanning more than 100 acres, it extended from the bay deep into the interior. While the waterfront provided breathtaking panoramas over Biscayne Bay, reaching those vistas demanded hacking through vegetation so thick that sightlines barely reached a few paces ahead. Mangroves ruled the water's edge, their intricate roots forming obstacles that separated dry ground from the sea. Further inland, dense hardwood groves and exotic plants created a virtually impassable web. Preparing the ground for Vizcaya involved converting this raw terrain into suitable building space, all while retaining sufficient scenic allure to evoke the sense of a manor that had organically blended with its surroundings over time. The process went beyond mere deforestation. It necessitated a grasp of the area's ecosystem, control of moisture levels, development of firm bases on shifting earth, and installation of support systems to sustain European-inspired designs in a humid climate. Water management emerged as the initial hurdle. In South Florida, the groundwater sat perilously close to the surface, sometimes mere inches beneath the soil. The terrain was inherently boggy, turning into a full inundation during rainy periods. Erecting durable stone edifices called for elevating the ground and implementing runoff solutions to avoid the residents subsiding into the mire. Experts devised a comprehensive network of waterways. Ditches were excavated to divert moisture from the construction zone. Fill material was imported to boost the height at spots for the residents and manicured gardens. This undertaking proved arduous and time-consuming, relying on crews wielding manual implements to shift dirt and rocks. During an age without advanced machinery, the mangroves posed distinct difficulties. These resilient, salt-enduring trees clustered tightly along the shore, their root networks locking the ground in place and erecting organic walls. Eliminating them was essential to forge the intended visual and physical link between the dwelling and the bay, though it threatened to undermine the coastal stability. The removal demanded precision, stripping just enough for sightlines and pathways while retaining plants to avert soil loss. The local exotic flora served as both hindrance and boon. The heavy undergrowth had to be removed from construction zones and planned garden spaces. Yet, established trees, especially the live oaks lending the estate its distinctive charm, were spared when feasible. These specimens lent an instant sense of age to the grounds, lending Vizcaya an air of timelessness rather than stark novelty. Hoffman and Suarez collaborated to decide which sections would undergo total clearance for structured gardens and which would stay as wilder settings. The goal wasn't to erase every trace of the tropics. The precise gardens encircling the house would embody strict European elegance, but farther out, a softer, more organic band would ease into the untouched native thickets. This seamless shift from structured to wild proved vital to Vizcaya's harmony with its environment. The ground composition further complicated efforts for classic garden flora. South Florida's gritty, high pH dirt bore no resemblance to the fertile humus of Old World domains. Enriched soil was transported for planting zones where Suarez aimed to cultivate species suited to milder seaside climates. The costs soared, yet such measures were indispensable for thriving formal landscapes. Sourcing stone for building brought both advantages and obstacles. Although South Florida missed the granite and limestone pits fueling projects up north, it offered plentiful coral rock. This spongy material, derived from prehistoric reefs, could be extracted nearby and shaped with relative ease. It served as a key component for enclosures, bases, and outdoor elements. While its absorbency caused issues in certain uses, it delivered a genuine roughness and hue that distant imports couldn't replicate. Reaching the property remained restricted. A primitive path linked it to Miami's unassuming city center, but it struggled to handle the influx from building activities. Upgrades were essential to transport supplies, tools, and laborers efficiently. Many resources arrived via sea, with vessels and flatboats unloading at a provisional pier built along the bay. The shore needed reshaping to establish the deliberate connection between the house and the water as envisioned. A retaining barrier was erected to mark the boundary between property and inlet, supplanting the wild mangrove fringe with deliberate design. This facilitated the stone barge, the iconic pier crafted as an artistic feature that would rank among Vizcaya's signature icons. The project featured numerous attributes that highlighted its grandeur. Construction efforts on the site involved hundreds of laborers, including a significant number of newcomers to Miami in search of jobs. The tasks were grueling, typically carried out under intense heat and moisture. Tasks like hacking through dense foliage with basic implements, shifting earth, digging out bases, and building runoff channels all demanded prolonged physical exertion. For numerous employees, this marked their first exposure to the enormous development initiative that would shortly become a cornerstone of Miami's financial landscape. The extent of the site's overhaul was without parallel in the region of South Florida. Earlier endeavors had never ventured into territory even vaguely comparable. Turning more than 100 acres of untamed land into a structured property, complete with vast landscaping, several structures, and the necessary support systems to sustain them. Preparation dragged on for months prior to the start of any real edifice assembly. As the ground was readied, its ties to the broader Miami surroundings grew evident. The land was linked to yet isolated from the expanding urban area. Near enough to utilize city amenities and transit options, yet distant sufficient to evoke a secluded retreat. The property's vastness formed its own realm, an enclosed compound where continental elegance could overlay the subtropical setting. By the end of 1914, preparations were complete for building to commence. The wild terrain had been subdued, if not eradicated. Drainage was managed. The structure's position was set and raised. Pathways and piers were operational. The interplay between structured and organic surroundings was outlined. Shifting from an impassable thicket to a viable estate demanded immense toil and cost, yet it laid the groundwork for all subsequent phases. James Daring now had his terrain set. Hoffman possessed his blueprint prepared. Challen had gathered the design components and decor. Artisans were convening. True building of Vizcaya could at last proceed. Morphing concepts and gathered resources into Renaissance-style structures, emerging unexpectedly along the tropical edge of Biscayne Bay. Erecting Vizcaya in this idyllic setting. Work kicked off vigorously in 1914, reshaping the cleared area into one of Florida's boldest construction ventures. The ambition of James Daring and his crew lacked any historical match, fashioning an Italian Renaissance residence through European artistry and supplies amid a humid climate that upended every norm of such edifices' creation. F. Burrell. Hoffman's design hurdles were pressing and core. Italian estates were crafted for the Mediterranean's warm, arid summers and temperate, rainy winters. South Florida delivered unyielding warmth and dampness throughout the year, fierce gales from tropical tempests that European structures were never built to endure, and ground that bore no resemblance to continental soils. Each choice in the plan necessitated re-examining established methods. The framework depended on reinforced concrete, an innovative substance ideal for humid builds. Distinct from timber, which decayed rapidly in Florida's moisture, or classic stonework needing thick barriers for firmness, this concrete enabled the reaches and elevations in Hoffman's vision, all while countering the environment's corrosive forces. Metal rods were integrated into the concrete to form a skeleton capable of bearing the edifice's weight and defying storm gusts. Outer surfaces merged various substances to deliver the look Daring desired, adapted for local conditions. Ground-level sections employed coral rock sourced nearby and from Cuba, yielding genuine roughness and the patina of time-worn Italian abodes. Higher levels received plaster over concrete, crafted to mimic old masonry, yet operating as contemporary engineering veiled by classic facades. The rooftop posed unique difficulties. Traditional Italian roofs used terracotta tiles, but Florida's cyclones would rip standard setups away. Hoffman's group devised fastening methods to anchor the tiles securely, preserving the true look while fulfilling requirements. The roof skeleton was itself poured concrete, not wooden beams, granting resilience against blasts that would demolish standard builds. Openings were broader and more plentiful than Italian models might indicate. This stemmed not from aesthetics, but from utility. Air circulation was vital before reliable cooling systems existed. The residence required steady drafts to stay bearable amid Florida's stifling summer swelter. Hoffman positioned the windows to harness dominant breezes, fostering movement across key spaces without compromising the stately demeanor of Renaissance forms. The crew gathered for Vizcaya's erection matched the global scope of its components and concept. Italian stonemasons. The sons contributed specialized skills in stone carving and installation that were beyond the capabilities of nearby laborers. Artisans from the Bahamas, familiar with coral rock and building in tropical climates, shared vital insights on handling regional materials amid high humidity. Experts from Germany and Czechoslovakia crafted intricate plaster decorations and sculpted features. Scottish specialists managed the metalwork. The property turned into a bustling hub of diverse tongues as laborers from varied backgrounds united their talents to forge a structure blending their unique abilities. During the height of building activity, about 1,000 people were involved across the initiative's different phases. For Miami, whose overall residents numbered roughly 10,000, this meant a massive boost to the economy. An entire tenth of the community's populace labored on a single estate. Paychecks poured into the area's finances, lodging facilities overflowed with staff, vendors supplied goods. The expansion of Miami during the 1910s owed much to the erection of Vizcaya. Sourcing materials reached immense proportions. Rock arrived from nearby quarries, Cuba, and parts of Europe. Wood for molds and support frameworks was shipped from southern U.S. regions. Metal reinforcements traveled by train from factories up north. Ornamental items, including vintage architectural components, sculpted fireplaces, and period woodwork, arrived from Europe in countless packed containers. Organizing the transport of such supplies to a location hampered by inadequate transport networks demanded advanced planning. James pushed to shorten the building schedule due to worries about his well-being and his wish to move in promptly. Correspondence among Deering, Hoffman, and Chalfin showed ongoing demands to hasten efforts without sacrificing the precision the plans required. The conflict between haste and superior craftsmanship generated strain across the endeavor, yet it also spurred impressive efficiency. The outbreak of World War I in 1914, coinciding with the project's launch, disrupted operations. Securing resources grew challenging as European manufacturing pivoted toward military demands. Talented workers, especially Europeans, encountered barriers to travel and conflicting allegiances. Certain employees headed back to their nations to join the armed forces. The conflict didn't halt Vizcaya's development, though it delayed advancement and necessitated adaptations when ideal supplies or experts proved unavailable. Toward the end of 1916, sufficient portions of the residence were finished for James to settle in. He docked on Christmas Day 1916 via his vessel, Nepenthe, welcomed by a dramatic salute of artillery that signaled Vizcaya's shift from worksite to livable home. Yet building persisted in surrounding areas for years afterward. Residing amid ongoing site activity surely proved trying, but James's enthusiasm to relish his vision surpassed any discomfort. Finishing the inside spaces posed the greatest challenge, involving synchronization of numerous specialties and weaving in the salvaged artifacts that Chalfin and Deering had gathered. Ancient overhead timbers had to be modified to align with the contemporary reinforced concrete framework. Period frames for entrances and openings required embedding into fresh partitions. Stone flooring combined reclaimed historic tiles with freshly hewn pieces designed to blend seamlessly. Each chamber evolved into an intricate assembly of merging the past with the present. Chalfin directed the finishing touches with meticulous focus on minutiae. He recognized that transforming a costly modern dwelling stocked with relics into a convincingly aged villa hinged on countless nuanced choices regarding the fusion of components. No piece could appear blatantly recent. Fresh additions had to evoke timeless presence, accomplished via thoughtful choices in substances, aged-like treatments, and arrangements that seemed innate rather than contrived. The painted ornamentation schemes called for dedicated painters laboring for months on specific overhead and vertical surfaces. Certain adornments were rescued from European structures and repositioned at Vizcaya. The rest were produced in place using age-old methods, yielding fresh designs that echoed the caliber and aesthetic of genuine relics. The overarching aim was fluidity, rendering it hard to separate authentic antiques from bespoke creations tailored for the property. Contemporary utilities were tucked away discreetly. Power lines were routed out of sight within partitions and overheads. Water systems for the many washrooms were fitted behind polished exteriors. A centralized warmth distribution setup, rare in Florida but essential for sporadic chills and steady moisture control, was embedded unobtrusively. Vizcaya boasted up-to-date amenities like lifts, a built-in suction cleaning apparatus, and among Miami's initial phone setups, all merged so adeptly that they never detracted from the era-evoking ambiance Deering envisioned. The project stood as a feat of engineering every bit as noteworthy as its aesthetic triumphs. Constructing architecture reminiscent of Europe under subtropical challenges demanded specialized approaches. Solving challenges without any proven methods in place, Hoffman and his crew were pioneering on the fly, crafting approaches that would shape building practices across Florida for generations. The triumphant finish of Vizcaya proved that intricate designs could endure and operate effectively amid South Florida's tough conditions. By 1922, the estate was mostly done, although refinements and tweaks carried on. Emerging from the lush, untamed landscape was something remarkable. A Renaissance-style palace that appeared timeless, equipped with contemporary comforts, and resilient in a setting where such grandeur seemed unfeasible. Building Vizcaya involved hiring thousands, pouring millions into Miami's finances, and producing a landmark unlike anything else in U.S. architecture. James Deering now possessed his dream home. The concept, refined over years of preparation and acquisitions, had materialized. Attention would soon turn from building to perfecting the grounds, and above all, to inhabiting and savoring the stunning surroundings he had brought to life. A tenth of Miami's populace benefited directly. The ripple effects on the local economy were profound. Vizcaya didn't merely alter one spot along Biscayne Bay, it reshaped Miami entirely, showcasing the metropolis's potential and funneling funds that sped up its shift from a rough outpost to a thriving city hub. The sheer number of jobs was game-changing. During the height of work, about 1,000 workers handled different parts of Vizcaya. Back in the mid-1910s, Miami's overall population hovered around 10,000. Basic math shows the magnitude. 1 out of every 10 locals was drawing a paycheck from just this one build. Nothing else matched that influence from a single outfit. Paychecks exceeded typical local rates. Talented tradespeople, especially those imported from Europe or the U.S. Northeast, received top-tier compensation. Untrained hands even secured reliable earnings that fed households and boosted commerce across the area. Funds James Deering spent on the build didn't linger at Vizcaya. They circulated through Miami, sustaining shopkeepers, inns, vendors, and myriad other ventures. The labor mix mirrored Miami's emerging multiculturalism. Bahamians, who had relocated to South Florida for jobs, made up a key segment of the crew. Their know-how in handling coral rock and adapting to tropical builds was vital, and gigs at Vizcaya offered financial security to Miami's expanding Bahamian population. African-American laborers, either from the Bahamas or the U.S., encountered bias in other fields but gained fairly consistent work on the Vizcaya site, albeit probably at reduced rates compared to white counterparts with similar expertise. Specialists from Europe, recruited just for Vizcaya, imported abilities and methods unknown in Miami before. Italian masons showcased age-old ways to shape marble and rock. Artisans from Germany and Czechoslovakia offered mastery in ornate plaster details. These experts didn't wrap up Vizcaya and vanish. Plenty settled in Miami post-project, launching their own operations and mentoring area talent. Vizcaya turned into an unofficial academy for crafts, elevating the overall quality of skilled work in the region. The chain of suppliers reached well past on-site jobs. Nearby quarries offloaded coral rock. Wood suppliers provided beams for molds and scaffolds. Tool and material dealers hawked gear. Hauling firms ferried goods from docks and train depots to the site. Each element of Vizcaya's build spurred activity for local outfits. Stretching over about 8 years from early groundwork to final touches, the endeavor delivered steady economic support during a time of major shifts. World War I upended parts of the U.S. economy, yet Vizcaya's progress pressed on, providing livelihoods when alternatives grew thin. It aided Miami in navigating the financial turbulence that hit much of the country. Property booms picked up pace, in part because Vizcaya highlighted the allure for big investors. James Deering had shown that affluent folks would commit hefty sums to Miami real estate. If a tycoon could erect an Italianate mansion, more might pursue their lavish compounds. The boost to Miami's confidence was huge. No longer a mere edge-of-the-wild settlement, it became a destination drawing refined structures and elite fortunes. The work also spurred upgrades to basics. The bumpy path from Vizcaya to central Miami got paved for heavier loads. Wharf setups at the property enhanced to manage incoming boats. Such enhancements served the neighborhood well beyond Vizcaya's wrap-up. Area merchants pivoted to cater to the effort, niche providers whose certain industries might not have taken root in Miami prior to James Deering's decision to launch operations there for the Vizcaya project, catering to the construction needs. Once established, these enterprises persisted, supplying resources and support for later expansions. Vizcaya essentially equipped Miami with the infrastructure necessary to fuel the city's expansion during the 1920s surge. The societal repercussions were multifaceted. While Vizcaya offered jobs and prospects, it also exposed deep-seated disparities. Craftsmen from Europe commanded wages much higher than those of local laborers performing similar strenuous tasks. White employees secured superior roles and compensation compared to black workers possessing equivalent expertise. The endeavor mirrored the racial and ethnic stratifications prevalent in early 20th century America, even while delivering financial gains to various groups. For Miami's black population, encompassing both U.S.-born and Bahamian individuals, positions at Vizcaya held substantial economic value, notwithstanding the biased pay scales. Reliable employment at whatever rate enabled households to settle in, accumulate savings, and lay groundwork for later advancements. Earnings from black laborers on Vizcaya fueled the expansion of Miami's black districts and enterprises. Finishing Vizcaya shifted views on Miami's potential. Guests invited by Deering or subsequent museum-goers witnessed proof that refined culture could thrive in South Florida. This realization drew additional influxes of affluent inhabitants and visitors who might have otherwise viewed Miami as overly rustic or underdeveloped for their tastes. The undertaking's magnitude also honed a cohort of laborers in advanced building methods. Individuals who mastered specialized crafts at Vizcaya applied that expertise to future endeavors. Miami's 1920s construction frenzy profited immensely from the skilled labor pool Vizcaya had cultivated. Without this initiative, the city would lack a reservoir of talent versed in premium quality work. A sense of local accomplishment in Vizcaya emerged swiftly. Residents recognized their role in forging something remarkable. The residents turned into a key conversation piece, illustrating that their modest town could sustain elite architectural feats. Such sentiment bolstered Miami's assurance as it ballooned throughout the 1920s. The ripple effects on the economy lingered well beyond the building phase. Vizcaya demanded ongoing personnel for upkeep, landscaping, and domestic functions. Deering's seasonal sojourns sustained numerous full-time jobs, generating steady income with broader implications for the regional market. During Deering's hosted gatherings, nearby vendors prospered by providing provisions, beverages, and amenities for opulent events. Miami's evolution from outpost to established urban center stemmed from diverse factors, yet Vizcaya stood out as one of the most prominent. The effort showcased Miami's ability to lure substantial capital and foster elegant progress. It developed talent, sparked enterprises, enhanced facilities, and reshaped attitudes toward the locale's prospects. Deering had erected his residence, yet in the process, he aided in erecting contemporary Miami. The 10% of the population engaged on Vizcaya wasn't merely erecting a dwelling. They were laying the bedrock for the city's enduring progress, demonstrating that Miami transcended its origins as a minor border outpost. The repercussions of that construction era would resonate in Miami's trajectory for generations, persisting after Deering's passing and Vizcaya's shift from personal retreat to communal attraction. The gardens blended formal European aesthetics with Florida's essence. Diego Suarez confronted a daunting task. He needed to craft Renaissance-inspired gardens in an environment that defied every tenet of European landscaping. The Italian precedents for Vizcaya's grounds were molded by a Mediterranean regime of scorching arid summers and temperate rainy winters. Vegetation followed reliable dormancy phases. Development remained manageable. Stone and water patinated elegantly over time. Florida presented no such stability. Deluges poured relentlessly. Flora surged vigorously throughout the seasons. Moisture eroded rock and alloy alike. The very notion of structured gardens appeared at odds with the subtropical milieu. Suarez had honed his skills at Villa La Pietra in Florence, immersed in the milieu where Italian Renaissance landscaping tenets had matured across ages. He grasped the lexicon. Elements organized in precise geometries, fountains serving as anchors, statues woven into structures, vistas forging connections among features. Yet, fluency in the idiom didn't guarantee its articulation amid Florida's conditions. The initial hurdle was philosophical. European landscapes asserted dominance over the wild through strict forms overlaid on the terrain. Foliage was sheared into improbable contours. Liquids were directed into stately jets and serene basins. Paved routes and barriers delineated sharp divides between tamed and untamed realms. Florida's vigorous proliferation derided any such dominion. Neglect a garden for just a couple of weeks and the wilderness would swiftly overtake it. Suarez opted for a calculated balance in his approach. The landscapes would stay meticulously structured close to the residents, easing into wilder forms the farther they strayed from the buildings. This setup formed distinct areas with varying atmospheres. The terraces right by Vizcaya and the nearest sections would adopt a strictly continental European look and upkeep. Deeper into the grounds, more subtropical features would blend in, yet the overall framework remained disciplined. The farthest reaches would shift to curated natural areas, recognizing that absolute dominance was impractical and unwise. Choosing the right flora called for ingenuity that verged on ingenuity under pressure. Classic Italian garden staples, like boxwood for hedging, roses for vibrancy, and timeless Mediterranean herbs, simply wouldn't endure Florida's conditions. Suarez sought out heat-loving species that could be molded to evoke old-world traditions. He discovered jasmine varieties trainable into shapes mimicking Italian borders. Carefully chosen local palms offered tall accents akin to the slender Italian cypresses. Vibrant subtropical bloomers, when kept in check, delivered hues without disrupting the precise layouts. Upkeep posed the biggest hurdle. Gardens in the Mediterranean's temperate zones needed steady but straightforward tending. Those in Florida insisted on relentless oversight. Species that expanded gradually in Italy burst forth rapidly amid Miami's warmth and downpours. A boxwood edge in Florence might receive clips only 3 or 4 times a year. Its jasmine counterpart in Miami required frequent pruning every couple of weeks to avoid breaking free from its orderly bounds. Suarez was crafting outdoor spaces that would demand teams of horticulturists laboring non-stop merely to sustain the facade of continental elegance. Aquatic features played a key role in Suarez's vision, though Florida's damp air introduced issues absent from Italian designs. Stagnant pools attracted swarms of insects. Cascades and basins had to feature ongoing flow and chemical balancing to stave off the slime that could transform elegant water mirrors into murky bogs. The piping networks proved far more intricate than their European models, incorporating motors and cleaners unfamiliar to Italian estates. The elevated garden hill emerged as a centerpiece, a man-made rise offering scenic vantage points and simulating diverse elevations. South Florida's pancake-flat terrain offered none of the natural undulations that Italian landscapes capitalized on. Suarez manufactured spatial depth via engineering feats instead of relying on the site's contours. Building the hill entailed huge volumes of earth, reinforcements against washout, and vegetation to anchor the fabricated slope without spoiling its aesthetic impact. Throughout the grounds, rock features merged genuine European artifacts with fresh carvings styled to harmonize. Railings, vases, statues, and building remnants rescued from overseas properties fused seamlessly with locally quarried coral stone. Patina developed unevenly. European sedimentary rock matured unlike Florida's reef material, but strategic positioning and foliage softened the contrasts. The aim was to craft gardens evoking ages of history, not recent creation. The hidden garden captured Suarez's philosophy perfectly. A secluded nook of cozy proportions, thick foliage forming a protective embrace, with rock and liquid accents as highlights. Its layout followed rigid avenues and arrangements echoing Renaissance exactitude, though the greenery was mostly native to the tropics, picked for resilience and formable into continental silhouettes. The outcome was an area that evoked Europe authentically, all while tailored to its true setting. The casino, positioned as a gazebo at the ground's perimeter, acted as a goal point and social hub. Traditional Italian estates often featured such outposts, allowing proprietors a break from the primary dwelling, yet staying within the orchestrated surroundings. Vizcaya's version fulfilled that role, but had to endure gale-force blasts and seasonal tempests beyond the experience of its Italian kin. Built from fortified concrete masked as aged stonework, It exemplified contemporary engineering veiled in period guise. Linking the landscapes to the waterfront demanded special focus. Continental chateaux usually nestled in fully tamed environs. Vizcaya's bayfront exposed the formal plots to untamed elements just beyond. Suarez leveraged the coast as an intentional foil. The structured sections concluded at the marine barrier, with Biscayne Bay's raw allure stretching out unchecked. This opposition amplified each side's appeal. Their nearness to the contrasting force made every aspect more vivid. Achieving the seasoned look James envisioned proved vital. Freshly installed greenery appears stark and incomplete. Storied Italian properties boasted landscapes refined across eras. Suarez aimed to imply that depth right away. He called for established trees where feasible, hefty examples relocated with great effort, yet granting immediate sophistication. Quick expanding tropical flora was incorporated with careful planning, selected for their rapid ability to form thick cover, despite the ongoing upkeep they would demand. The structured areas close to the residence posed Suarez's toughest obstacle. These angular planting zones, central to Italian landscaping traditions, called for vegetation that could be meticulously clipped into exact configurations and kept in perpetual tidy condition. The alternatives he selected delivered an appealing appearance, but necessitated significantly greater care than the plants typically used in Europe. Ensuring those sections remained sharp and defined in Florida's environment meant a relentless fight against the vigorous advance of tropical vegetation. Artistic installations across the grounds were positioned thoughtfully to forge visual connections and direct visitors' paths through the crafted terrain. Certain works were authentic European relics from bygone eras. Additional ones were crafted on commission for Vizcaya, produced in time-honored techniques. Their arrangement adhered to Renaissance guidelines on perspectives and emphasis points, yet adapted to the altered illumination and plant thickness, unlike what Italian models had anticipated. In the early 1920s, as the gardens neared full realization, Suarez had accomplished an extraordinary feat. Vizcaya's grounds evoked a European essence. Those familiar with Italian estate gardens detected the familiar motifs and valued the genuineness. Nevertheless, these spaces thrived amid tropical circumstances that ought to have rendered such elegance unfeasible. This success hinged on unceasing care at intensities well beyond those required for European counterparts. Still, the aesthetic impact proved utterly triumphant. The gardens eventually demanded an expenditure almost equal to the mansion's construction, underscoring the complexity of enforcing continental rigor upon a subtropical backdrop. James Deering possessed the means to support the essential ongoing work, though the enduring issue lingered. Could others follow suit? Following his passing, the grounds encountered perils that jeopardized their existence. Escalating upkeep expenses and battering from hurricanes would probe the resilience of Suarez's balance between classical European aesthetics and the exigencies of Florida's setting. During the time James savored Vizcaya, the gardens delivered precisely the vision he had conceived: continental grace and refinement relocated to a lush, warm milieu. The improbable had materialized via Suarez's expertise, vast funding, and the recognition that upholding the mirage would entail ceaseless dedication at immense financial outlay. The stone barge, Vizcaya's signature seawall projection emerging from Biscayne Bay, positioned just beyond the estate's eastern veranda, represents one of the most distinctive building elements ever devised for a U.S. property. This immense rock formation, modeled after a Renaissance vessel, functioned dually as a wave barrier, observation deck, and bold, creative declaration. Known eventually as the stone barge, it addressed a functional necessity while introducing a striking and memorable sight. Vizcaya's bayside position granted breathtaking water vistas, but left it vulnerable to swells and tidal surges. An ordinary concrete barrier might have shielded the coast, but clashed with the artistic standards championed by James Deering and his collaborators. Thus, any required coastal defense was reimagined as a work of beauty. The idea developed from discussions among Chaffin, Hoffman, and Suarez. They pictured an artistic seawall resembling an imaginary vessel, a caravel evoking the era of discovery when Spanish ships first approached Florida's coastline. The installation was meant to dissipate wave power prior to it hitting the retaining wall, safeguarding the veranda and manicured grounds from corrosive brine and tempest harm. The proposal was bold. The stone barge needed to be robust enough to endure cyclones, anchored in the bay with its front oriented southeastward to counter dominant breezes and currents. Yet instead of seeming utilitarian or fortress-like, it would be embellished, sculpted, and adorned akin to a Renaissance warship, featuring animated figures and intricate elements that invited detailed scrutiny. Erecting the stone barge involved overcoming novel engineering hurdles. It demanded secure bases embedded in the baybed capable of withstanding gale pressures. The mass was staggering, hundreds of tons comprising rock, cement, and infill. Assembly entailed fashioning provisional staging over the water, ferrying supplies via vessels, and crafting ornate stonework amid the punishing exposure to sunlight, seawater, and moisture. The artist Alexander Sterling Calder was hired to fashion the barge's figurines. Calder, parent to the renowned Alexander Calder, who would transform contemporary art, was a seasoned creator, blending rigorous classical education with inventive flair. For Vizcaya, his contributions were imaginative rather than lifelike, evoking legendary beings and adventurers over precise historical depictions. The stone barge's silhouette stretched roughly 160 feet, contoured to mimic a vessel's body. Its prow ascended sharply, etched with flourishes reminiscent of Baroque embellishments. The eastern end showcased a pavilion-style edifice with pillars upholding an ornate canopy. This whole ensemble was crafted from coral stone, mirroring the material employed across Vizcaya's buildings, fostering a seamless aesthetic link between the residence and the floating platform. The sculptures by Calder animated the platform as if it were a static ensemble of mariners. Certain forms evoked seafarers or adventurers, while others embodied whimsical amalgamations of human and oceanic traits. These reliefs were not intended for clear viewing from the dwelling. Instead, they offered enigmatic accents that unfolded progressively as observers strolled the veranda or ventured out in vessels for a nearer inspection of the platform. Its placement was meticulously planned. Positioned too near the coastline, it would fail to disrupt swells adequately. Set too remotely, it might sever ties to the home's sightlines. The chosen spot achieved ideal equilibrium, proximate sufficient to integrate into Vizcaya's crafted surroundings, yet remote enough to assert its standalone role as an artistic installation amid the inlet. Beneath the surface, the construction featured clever, concealed mechanics. Cement bases plunged far into the bay's seabed, while the rock components were fastened with invisible braces that guaranteed resilience against gale-force winds. An intentional aperture permitted currents to circulate through and beside it, avoiding a rigid obstruction that would amplify pressures, all while dissipating surge momentum proficiently. Upon finishing, the rock platform delivered the precise impact that Chalfin and Deering had imagined. Viewed from the estate, it resembled an enchanting vessel forever stationed in the harbor, an artistic caprice implying opulence so lavish it could adorn the sea with lithic craft. Approaching via watercraft, as James frequently did, it heralded Vizcaya with striking flair, an implausible creation proclaiming the property's unwavering dedication to unyielding elegance. Beyond shielding against waves, the platform fulfilled utilitarian roles. It formed a tranquil aquatic zone between its form and the shoreline, simplifying vessel berthing along Vizcaya's dockside. James, possessor of several pleasure boats and an avid boater, gained from this secure haven. The platform enhanced Vizcaya's approachability by sea, crucial during times when affluent guests commonly arrived aboard their own craft. This lithic platform emerged as one of Vizcaya's premier subjects for imagery, distinctly identifiable and beyond imitation. While rival properties boasted manicured grounds or Italianate designs, none possessed a perpetual stone vessel stationed in their private waters. It encapsulated James Deering's essence, transforming essential requirements into bold creative declarations via boundless means and refined discernment. The platform also captured the capricious spirit infusing Vizcaya, even amid its dignified design heritage. Though a Renaissance-inspired villa, it stemmed from a single man's license to pursue fanciful notions. Devoid of any prior models, the rock platform was original whimsy, thriving because its creators championed the pursuit of aesthetically bold improbabilities. Through years, the platform repeatedly validated its functional merits. Tempests ravaging Vizcaya's landscaping and structures spared the platform intact, underscoring the robust mechanics veiled in its aesthetic shell. The rock reliefs endured exposure more robustly than anticipated, with coral stone demonstrating unexpected tenacity in saline conditions. What appeared the frailest, most indulgent, and ornamental facet proved among Vizcaya's triumphs. Moreover, the platform forged a singular optical bond between Vizcaya and Biscayne Bay, unparalleled in U.S. properties. Typical coastal holdings viewed the sea as mere scenery or convenience. Vizcaya integrated the bay into its orchestrated vista, molding and embellishing it akin to the grounds. The rock platform projected Vizcaya's framework onto the waves, annexing the bay into the domain's creative realm. To James, it embodied his Vizcaya aspirations entirely: unrepentant allure, dual utility, and artistry. Proof that vast wealth paired with cultured judgment could birth unprecedented artifacts. Enduring and fortified against tempests and eras, it guaranteed Vizcaya's legacy through true originality. In the present, the rock platform endures as a cherished hallmark of Vizcaya, gracing innumerable images and embodying its hallmark icon. Its endurance amid cyclones and prolonged disrepair in Vizcaya's challenging post-war period affirmed that well-crafted, lavish expressions rival sturdy traditional builds in longevity. The rock platform testifies that James Deering's Vizcaya dream transcended mere utility. It sought to craft enriching splendor that challenged norms. In a harbor where pragmatic builders might have opted for sturdy concrete seawalls, James Deering and his collaborators instead crafted a stone vessel reminiscent of the Renaissance, prioritizing elegance over mere efficiency and valuing creativity above all expenses. The inner spaces evoked continental grandeur amid the subtropical setting. Upon entering Vizcaya, the sweltering outdoor warmth fades away, giving way to the refreshing shade of chambers that appear seamlessly lifted from a grand Italian villa. This precise vision was what James Deering and Paul Chalfin had envisioned. The designs were so genuinely European in feel that guests could easily overlook their location in Florida. The foyer established the mood right from the start. Soaring over 2 levels with a majestic stairway as its centerpiece, the area proclaimed Vizcaya as a monument of thoughtful design, far beyond a mere seaside retreat. The steps were crafted from marble, featuring a balustrade of sculpted stone accented with wrought iron. The walls were clad in imported European masonry, including pieces reclaimed from genuine Renaissance structures. Overhead, the ceiling blended robust beams with ornamental frescoes done by artisans employing age-old methods. Chalfin's brilliance lay in harmonizing countless features so they appeared organic and unified rather than pieced together. Every chamber possessed its own distinct architectural personality, as if it had developed gradually through the ages. Surfaces adorned with vintage woodwork, overheads embellished with era-specific motifs, flooring laid with reclaimed substances, and openings framed by rescued components. Contemporary additions were fashioned to blend with the antique, utilizing classic substances and methods, rendering the transitions between past and present undetectable. The East Loggia perfectly illustrated Vizcaya's triumph in tailoring European aesthetics to the demands of Florida living. This area, accessible to the water via graceful arches, blurred the line between indoors and out. In Italy, a loggia offered sheltered alfresco areas suited to the mild Mediterranean weather. Yet, Florida's sticky air and bugs posed challenges for such designs. Vizcaya's version struck a practical balance, structurally inviting yet equipped with removable screens for protection when required, ensuring airflow alongside defense. The outcome captured true Italian essence while adapting to the humid tropics. The parlors showcased varied strategies for fostering a European vibe. The Renaissance salon employed rich timber cladding and intricate overhead timbers to evoke 16th-century Italian influences. It conveyed a robust, austere masculinity ideal for dignified gatherings. The furnishings consisted of genuine Renaissance and Baroque items, chosen for their excellence in fitting proportions. In contrast, the music parlor adopted a brighter mood, with mural accents and finer accents. Intended for lively amusements and convivial meetings, its decor aimed for cheerfulness over intimidation. The overhead displayed trompe-l'oeil artwork, depicting playful cherubs amid ethereal skies to mimic an expansive view above. Softer hues dominated, with subtle gold accents and gentle pastels supplanting the heavier tones of grander areas. The dining chamber struck a poised equilibrium between ceremony and coziness. Spacious enough for lavish banquets, it sidestepped the echoing vastness that might render it unwelcoming. Timber walls and a commanding hearth imparted strong structural appeal. Above, a paneled ceiling held painted embellishments within a patterned grid. The seating mainly drew from 18th-century sources, prioritized for ease over ostentatious size. James's upper-level quarters were more personal, yet no less sophisticated. His sleeping area was humbly scaled compared to palatial norms, adorned with subtle choices reflecting individual preference over ostentation. The adjoining bath, though, was a marvel of all-marble construction, integrating up-to-date sanitation with era-fitting hardware. An overhead mural of mythical tales transformed utility into aesthetic delight. The study ranked among Vizcaya's finest achievements, merging practicality with artistry without effort. Tall shelving from floor to ceiling housed James's volumes. A generous writing table offered a productive surface. Plush chairs formed nooks for contemplation, while the space itself shone architecturally through its adorned overhead and curated finishes, evoking a continental thinker's sanctuary. Designed for daily engagement as much as admiration, it excelled on both fronts. Across the residence, Chalfin strategically arranged artifacts from James's and his own acquisition journeys: pottery, statues, canvases, fabrics, and sundry ornamental works. Rather than mere accents, each item was cited to amplify the ambiance and highlight its form. Vizcaya served as a discreet gallery, safeguarding an impressive trove while sustaining livable comfort. The incorporation of contemporary infrastructure remained discreet. Wiring for electricity was tucked away in partitions. Lamps were either custom-made or modified from historical models to deliver light without disrupting the period look. Heating units hid behind ornate covers. Washrooms boasted current sanitation systems, though with hardware, the furnishings were crafted to align with the era of each room. Vizcaya blended 20th-century amenities seamlessly into an aesthetic drawn from the 16th to 18th centuries. Meanwhile, the areas reserved for servants, hidden on the upper levels and in the basement, prioritized practicality above all. These included the kitchen, laundry facilities, storage rooms, and quarters for the help, designed purely for functionality, not for show. The difference stood out sharply, underscoring the rigid class structures of affluent early 20th century America. Vizcaya's splendor relied on unseen toil, with domestic workers upholding the facade of seamless refinement. The open-air courtyard, exposed to the heavens, infused that vital Mediterranean essence into the Italian villa layout. This heart of the property drew sunlight far inside the structure, while forming a sheltered outdoor retreat shielded from breezes and prying eyes. Fountains offered both auditory and visual anchors, while greenery wove the outdoors into the built environment. What elevated Vizcaya beyond mere imitation was this courtyard, evoking a true Renaissance estate instead of just an oversized home in period garb. Artisanship across the board reached exceptional heights. Hardware for doors and windows came custom forged in bronze. Plaster details were applied by hand by expert artisans. Stonework achieved levels fit for galleries. The joinery showcased techniques vanishing amid the rise of factory methods. Vizcaya captured what might have been the final era for rallying such thorough old-world skills into one private home. Hues inside proved bolder and more vibrant than in most U.S. residences of the time. Plush reds, golden tones, lush greens that rang true under Mediterranean sun but adapted remarkably to Florida's glow. Chalfin grasped how pigmentation could shrink or expand a room's feel, deploying it with intent across every corner. Chalfin's vision, backed by James's support, yielded a residence that exuded antiquity even fresh from the builders. Guests struggled to separate genuine relics from fresh creations in classic modes. The rooms gained that weathered charm, the aura of layered heritage James had sought. Vizcaya avoided the vibe of a tycoon's fresh pad. It resembled a Renaissance villa inexplicably relocated to Florida's waterfront. Over those initial years, James savored Vizcaya without reservation. The insides delivered the precise backdrop he had imagined, continental polish amid a balmy locale, timeless allure paired with up-to-date ease, a dwelling that paid homage to bygone days yet fully embraced its present. Ultimately, the interiors marked Vizcaya's pinnacle, evidence that U.S. fortunes and old-world traditions could merge into true marvels. For a single man, Vizcaya embodied an ideal haven. James Deering at last possessed the legacy of his prolonged efforts, a Renaissance palace along Biscayne Bay, landscapes hinting at ages of tending and the liberty to dwell precisely on his terms. To a prosperous widower nearing 60, Vizcaya delivered an uncommon gift, a holistic creative realm molded by one man's unyielding imagination, free from familial pressures or societal musts. Daily life at Vizcaya mirrored James's distinct character and pursuits. He shunned relentless socializing. Extended stretches passed in quiet delight within the home and grounds, perusing books in the library, strolling the verandas, gazing at the bay. Vizcaya suited reflection as readily as revelry, with areas that invited serene observation over non-stop bustle. During James's stays, usually spanning late autumn to early spring, the property ran with a core team of about 30. This covered domestics, groundskeepers, repair crews, culinary personnel, and experts needed to sustain a domain as intricate as Vizcaya. Employees resided on-site or in the service enclave, a cluster of support structures rendering the grounds mostly independent. Ties between James and his workforce followed formal norms of the day, yet proved progressive for the epoch. Compensation was generous, conditions fair. Numerous retainers stuck around for decades, indicating Vizcaya as an appealing workplace amid its high expectations. The gulf between master and help remained firm, echoing the time's order. Yet James evidently regarded his people with dignity, if not warmth. Paul Chalfin stayed deeply entwined in Vizcaya's world well beyond the build's end. He dropped by often, lingering for weeks at times. The bond with James transcended business, bordering on kin. For the childless James, Chalfin's presence met voids that solitude might have deepened. For Chalfin, James. He served as both benefactor and confidant, a figure who aligned with his artistic sensibilities and supplied the means to sustain a level of elegance beyond most people's reach. Hosting events at Vizcaya was discerning, not relentless. James organized evening meals, outdoor receptions, and sporadic bigger assemblies. Yet he avoided the aggressive pursuit of social supremacy seen among Newport's rival tycoons. Invitations leaned toward genuine bonds and shared intellectual pursuits over strategic alliances. The attendees included creators like painters, authors, composers, and refined souls capable of valuing Vizcaya and enriching dialogues. Such companions suited James best. The estate facilitated gatherings with grace. Its formal eating area handled sizable suppers effortlessly. The performance space offered an ideal backdrop for recitals and shows. The grounds provided spots for alfresco occasions, from cozy terrace meetups to expansive affairs across the greens and trails. Still, Vizcaya avoided turning into an arena for societal rivalry. James had constructed it for his own fulfillment, where hospitality stemmed from delight, not duty. His vessels, especially the Nepenthe, carried Vizcaya's refined way of life across the waves. Sailing brought James immense joy, and Biscayne Bay delivered ideal waters. The rock pier ensured secure anchoring, allowing easy access for his craft. Among James's most cherished moments at Vizcaya were those spent afloat, savoring the bay's scenic allure and the liberation of navigation. Vizcaya's tie to Miami stayed somewhat removed. Civic matters or the local elite held little appeal for James. He had selected Miami for its beneficial weather, aiding his well-being, and for the open spaces permitting unrestricted construction. However, he refrained from imposing himself on Miami's social fabric or stepping into leadership roles. Vizcaya stood as a secluded realm, situated beside an expanding urban center without fully integrating into it. James's health, the primary impetus for relocating to Florida, saw partial improvement, but no complete recovery. Pernicious anemia could be controlled, though not eradicated given the era's medical limitations. Continuous care and oversight remained essential. The mild weather aided his condition, and Vizcaya's serene surroundings eased routines far more than Chicago's harsh seasons could have. Yet James recognized his lifespan might be shortened, a realization that likely fueled his resolve to finish Vizcaya and savor it in the present. The single man's routine, enabled by Vizcaya, bucked norms of the day. Affluent males typically wed, raised offspring, and forged lasting lineages. James opted for another path, driven by choice or fate. Vizcaya embodied a divergent ideal of affluence, one centered on artistic excellence and individual contentment over lineage and progeny. Observers of the time no doubt pondered James's unmarried state and his intimate tie to Chalfin. Their bond's precise character eludes full historical scrutiny, much like many such ties from that period. Undeniable, however, is their mutual fondness and reliance, the pivotal role their partnership played in Vizcaya's creation, and how the residence symbolized a shared triumph surpassing typical patron-designer dynamics. Vizcaya featured dedicated areas to welcome James's nieces and nephews, his siblings' offspring, including a bowling lane, tennis facilities, and a pool adaptable for fresh or seawater. These leisure options hinted at James's desire for the youth to cherish Vizcaya. Lacking immediate successors, he envisioned the property enduring past his lifetime. Vizcaya's everyday joys arose more from its inherent ambience than from grand pursuits. Strolling the grounds at dawn, observing the bay's shifting hues through the day, perusing books in the study, or studying items from his curated assortment, these understated pleasures gained depth from the masterful surroundings shaped by James and his collaborators. Each view uncovered elegance, selected or crafted to embody peak refinement. As James reached his 60s, he likely contemplated his accomplishments. No offspring to carry on, no corporate empire to bequeath. His tenure at International Harvester had been solid yet unremarkable. What endured was Vizcaya, proof of his grasp of beauty, his discerning palate, and his command of wealth to materialize artistic ideals. For someone lacking traditional markers of success via kin or profession, the villa emerged as his enduring tribute. The handful of years James fully relished Vizcaya, from settling in during late 1916 into the early 1920s, marked the realization of his lifelong aims. The residence operated precisely as planned. The landscapes flourished splendidly. The artwork and decor evoked the mood he had imagined. Vizcaya had triumphed. Vizcaya stood as a remarkable artistic triumph and an ideal residence. Yet, time slipped away relentlessly. Despite the salubrious Florida weather and the estate's inviting accommodations, James's condition worsened steadily. The endeavor that had dominated his existence for the past 15 years, from conception to realization, had reached its conclusion. Now, he could savor the fruits of his labor, though the era of invention had drawn to a close. What lingered was the chance to dwell in and cherish the exceptional setting he and his partners had realized, the fleeting splendor, daring's concluding phase and passing. By the start of the 1920s, Vizcaya had been fully realized. The residence operated flawlessly, the landscapes had flourished, the artworks were in place. James Daring, entering his 7th decade, at last could relish the outcome of those 15 years devoted to design and erection. However, his vitality ebbed more swiftly than expected. James's well-being, fragile ever since his pernicious anemia verdict, faltered even amid Florida's beneficial atmosphere and Vizcaya's soothing environs. The affliction could be controlled but not eradicated using the medicine of the early 1900s. Interventions relied on liver infusions and nutritional oversight, rudimentary compared to future advancements, yet the finest options then. James benefited from top-tier medical attention, yet pernicious anemia advanced inexorably. Vizcaya's winter seasons unfolded in agreeable patterns. James typically arrived in late autumn, around November or December, lingering until spring's onset. The property ran efficiently under its skilled personnel. Routine blended leisure with pursuits that delighted him, perusing books, boating, strolling the grounds, inspecting items from his assortment. Socializing remained discerning, intimate suppers and assemblies with companions free from societal demands. Paul Chalfin stayed a steadfast figure, dropping by often and extending his visits. Over the 15 years of Vizcaya's development, their bond had deepened from mere work partnership to a more intimate and profound connection. For James, Chalfin offered fellowship that enriched a single man's routine. They bonded over shared artistic tastes, recollections of continental journeys, and the fulfillment of co-forging an exceptional legacy. Historians have pondered the essence of James and Chalfin's tie. Its precise character stays somewhat veiled, typical of such bonds in that period. What records confirm is sincere fondness, intimate teamwork, and reciprocal reliance that surpassed standard occupational lines. Vizcaya emerged as their shared vision, extending past client and architect. James's nieces and nephews dropped in sporadically, delighting in the leisure facilities he'd added, in part for their benefit. The bowling lane, tennis facilities, and pool buzzed with energy during their stays. Childless himself, James envisioned Vizcaya appealing across generations, aspiring for the property to hold significance for his kin long after he departed. Observers noted the evident joy James derived from Vizcaya. He had accomplished the uncommon, crafting a space that mirrored his preferences and principles impeccably. Each chamber, vista, and artifact embodied choices he had shaped or endorsed. For a man of his affluence and refinement, this epitomized supreme indulgence, not merely possessing fine items, but residing within a holistic artistic declaration. Still, the success carried a poignant edge. James had invested so extensively in preparation and assembly that his tenure of pure enjoyment proved short-lived. From settling in during late 1916 until his demise in 1925, he savored fewer than 9 years in the finished abode. Considerable portions of that span overlapped with ongoing work on the grounds and auxiliary structures. The interval when all elements were wholly operational as envisioned spanned merely a handful of years. Consciousness of his finite days likely tinged James's immersion in Vizcaya. He had constructed for endurance, fashioning an edifice meant to endure for ages. Yet his own occupancy would be scant. The manor symbolized both triumph and absence, evidence of his grasp of elegance and his capacity to manifest it, but also a poignant cue that vast riches could not procure vitality or longevity. During the summer of 1925, James journeyed to Europe, perhaps for health advice or customary exploration, as he had often done. His deterioration grew severe, prompting a choice to head back to the United States. He secured a berth on the steamship SS City of Paris, sailing from France toward New York. The crossing turned deadly. On September 21, 1925, James Daring perished on the vessel Mid-Atlantic. At 65, pernicious anemia undoubtedly precipitated the end, though precise details of the event remain sparse. His remains were conveyed stateside and interred at Graceland Cemetery in Chicago, the metropolis where he amassed his wealth and from which he had fled each W. The passing of James left a profound shock among his acquaintances, even if it came as little surprise in retrospect. His ongoing health struggles had long been apparent to loved ones. Yet death retains an element of surprise, no matter how slowly it advances. James appeared almost indestructible, much like the estate of Vizcaya. Accepting that the residence would endure without its founder demanded a shift in perspective. In his last will and testament, James outlined his wishes for Vizcaya and his wealth. Ownership transferred to his nieces, Mary and Daring McCormick and Barbara Daring Danielson, offspring of his half-brother Charles. He allocated generous donations to key establishments, including medical facilities, cultural venues, and learning institutions. The Art Institute of Chicago acquired several standout artworks from his personal holdings. Numerous benevolent groups reaped rewards from his generous spirit, yet the primary assets, encompassing Vizcaya, devolved to relatives. James envisioned them sustaining the property, potentially integrating it into their routines as he once did, safeguarding his handiwork while weaving it into their personal worlds. He might not have thoroughly weighed the practicality of this, considering the steep upkeep for such an expansive domain. The yearly outlays for running Vizcaya proved considerable, even for affluent successors. Paul Chalfin felt utterly shattered by James's demise. He mourned not merely a benefactor, but his dearest companion and collaborator on what became his crowning achievement. Chalfin stayed tied to Vizcaya for subsequent years, guiding the inheritors on upkeep and conservation matters. Still, the abode altered irrevocably sans James. The dynamic collaboration that birthed Vizcaya had concluded. The harsh twist in James's fate stung deeply. He had constructed Vizcaya in part to foster a salubrious setting for ease amid his ailment. The dwelling had indeed delivered those intervals of comparative ease and delight. In the end, however, the very illness that drew him to Miami ultimately claimed him, as he perished not within Vizcaya's walls, but en route over the sea, heading back from another continental excursion. At James's passing, Vizcaya stood at its zenith. The structure stood finished and impeccably tended. The landscapes had ripened and operated per Suarez's blueprint. The personnel operated with skill and precision. All facets hummed precisely as envisioned. It formed an impeccable mechanism for elegant existence, now bereft of its originator. Vizcaya's short-lived splendor during James's tenure had drawn to a close. Barely 9 years of unadulterated pleasure for a creation that demanded 15 years of conception and construction. The imbalance stood out sharply, though it may embody the essence of monumental artistic endeavors. Such works arise from protracted toil and persist far beyond their makers, even as the span of direct engagement by their architects proves ephemeral. James Deering accomplished his ambition. He had forged a Renaissance-inspired villa amid Miami's tropics, proving that refined discernment, paired with ample means, could yield something wholly novel. He had embodied in tangible form an artistic ideal honed over years of continental exploration and scholarship. He bequeathed an enduring heritage that would eclipse his lifespan by eras. Yet the toll was steep. The time devoted to design and erection represented moments not dedicated to mere existence. The riches poured into masonry and masterpieces could have fueled alternative endeavors, and the scant window of gratification prior to mortality's call appeared a bitter recompense for such prodigious labor. Vizcaya now confronted an ambiguous path ahead. James's successors would assume both the asset and the onus of its care. The dilemma lingered. Could others cherish Vizcaya sufficiently to uphold it per James's blueprint, or would the residence erode steadily once its founder's driving force vanished? Neglect, tempests, and deterioration loomed. James's departure thrust Vizcaya into suspension. His nieces, Mary and Daring McCormick and Barbara Daring Danielson, came into possession of a remarkable domain alongside a formidable responsibility. The edifice, which had demanded millions in its erection, called for persistent heavy funding just to sustain. Neither Mary nor Barbara resided at Vizcaya. Each maintained her own dwellings and kin. The inheritance gleamed with beauty, historical weight, and worth, yet it scarcely suited their needs as it had James's. A single man might fashion Vizcaya into a seasonal haven, structuring his days around periodic stays. But wedded women with offspring and settled homes deemed the estate unwieldy for all its magnificence. The financial demands of Vizcaya's preservation intimidated. The house necessitated a constant crew, even in vacancy. The grounds required unrelenting oversight to fend off jungle overgrowth encroaching on the structured greenery. Infrastructure like pipes, wiring, and climate controls demanded vigilant inspection and repair. Levies on such prime land amassed considerably. The recurring expenditures soared into hundreds of thousands of dollars, even by 1920 standards. In the initial years following James's death, the siblings strove to manage Paul Chalfin's stayed on to offer guidance and supervision, striving to keep Vizcaya close to its former glory. The employees pressed on with their duties. The grounds received care, yet absent James's direct oversight and generous funding for upkeep, minor issues started to pile up. Then, in September 1926, just shy of a year following James's passing, calamity hit. The Great Miami Hurricane, among the fiercest tempests to batter South Florida, ravaged the area. Vizcaya, vulnerable along Biscayne Bay, suffered severe destruction. The stone barge built as a barrier demonstrated its value by shielding the residents from the most intense wave action. However, the landscapes lay in ruins. The elaborate arrangements Suarez had designed and James had sustained at great cost were ripped to shreds by gales and submerged in brine. The pavilion perched on the stone barge vanished completely. Trees were torn from their roots. Garden ornaments faced harm or total loss. The shelter that had topped the barge was gone. The devastation proved thorough. Rebuilding from the storm's toll demanded an overwhelming sum. Paul Chalfin returned to direct the recovery efforts, leaving the sisters to grapple with tough choices on funding a site they rarely used and struggled to offload. They approved major fixes to the dwelling and essential support for the grounds, though returning to the pre-storm state lay beyond their means. The hurricane's impact signaled a shift. Prior to the gale, optimism lingered that Vizcaya could operate much as James had envisioned. Post-storm, such notions crumbled. The estate would never reclaim the flawlessness of James's last days. The issue shifted from avoiding decay to gauging its pace and depth. During the late 1920s and 1930s, the sisters dropped in occasionally but lingered briefly. The home sat largely vacant, looked after by a shrunken crew making do on scant supplies. The once pristine landscapes, rivaling the building's elegance, turned untamed as lush plants seized on lapses in care. Neat sections grew choked with foliage. Water features went quiet. Walkways vanished beneath rampant greenery. The Great Depression piled financial strain atop the mounting woes. The sisters' wealth suffered from the market plunge and ensuing downturn. Sustaining Vizcaya grew ever more taxing. They started divesting chunks of land, shrinking the initial 180 acres to a more handleable scale. Yet this fractured the property's historic edges and surroundings. In 1945, they offloaded large tracts to the Catholic diocese to build Mercy Hospital. The deal injected vital funds but forever changed Vizcaya's environment. The medical facility's erection brought city expansion right up to an enclave meant for seclusion. The detachment from Miami that James had nurtured eroded. More hurricanes across the 1940s and 50s inflicted added harm. Each blow necessitated fixes the sisters grew hesitant or unable to finance. The structure held firm, a nod to Hoffman's design prowess and the build's superior craftsmanship, but the inner spaces bore signs of disregard. The grounds kept deteriorating. Vizcaya edged toward collapse. As the sisters grew older, their capacity to oversee even basic upkeep waned. By the early 1950s, they confronted a looming choice, years in the making. What fate for Vizcaya? Upkeep proved unattainable. No individual purchaser wanted the albatross of a parcel. Raising it would devastate, yet might stand as the sole practical option. Vizcaya's state by 1952 sobered all. The residents called for broad refurbishment. The landscapes demanded wholesale renewal and mending. Infrastructure lagged or broke down. The site overall posed a conservation hurdle needing millions in prolonged labor for true revival. Still, the framework endured. Hoffman's framework stayed solid. Hunt's interior schemes, though marred, mostly persisted. The grounds, wild as they were, kept their core layout. Sufficient remnants allowed for renewal, provided a backer with means and resolve emerged. The sisters ultimately chose a path that spared Vizcaya from the wrecking ball, if not from public handover. In 1952, they transferred the home, structured gardens, and 50 acres left to Miami-Dade County for $1 million, well under true worth, yet surpassing any private offer. The deal encompassed James's decor and artworks, gifted to bind them to the site. The sum strikes as astonishingly modest, $1 million for a property. The estate, constructed at a cost exceeding $15 million just 3 decades prior, was now available for a fraction of that sum. From the county's viewpoint, the deal was financially prudent. They weren't merely purchasing a residence but inheriting a massive responsibility for upkeep. That initial $1 million outlay marked only the start of the extensive investments required to render Vizcaya suitable as a community museum. Vizcaya had endured, yet it had undergone a profound shift. The secluded haven James had fashioned for his solitary pursuits was about to transition into communal territory, evolving into an attraction where paying guests could glimpse the lifestyle of a wealthy magnate. The cozy areas where James had lounged and hosted guests would soon echo with the chatter of students and sightseers. The serene grounds where he had strolled in solitude would now bustle with throngs of people. The era spanning James's passing in 1925 until the county's acquisition in 1952 marked Vizcaya's most perilous period. The property had devolved from pristine splendor to neglect, from rigorous care to subtle deterioration, from cherished personal gem to burdensome relic that puzzled potential owners. It was solely the resolve to safeguard such a remarkable site that shielded Vizcaya from the wrecking ball that felled countless other opulent Gilded Age mansions, safeguarding history and enduring impact, rescuing the vision. Miami-Dade County's purchase of Vizcaya in 1952 averted its destruction, yet it introduced fresh hurdles, repurposing a secluded villa into an accessible exhibit while upholding its essence and tackling years of postponed repairs. The county unveiled Vizcaya as the Dade County Art Museum in 1953, scarcely a year post-acquisition. This rapid launch stemmed from zeal for the endeavor alongside scant funds for thorough refurbishment prior to public access. The structure received basic cleaning and fortification, though full-scale renewal would span years and demand millions the county lacked at the outset. Initial patrons encountered a Vizcaya that James might scarcely identify. The rooms kept their core ambiance, but surfaces had worn thin. The landscapes lay wild, structured beds smothered by lush subtropical growth. The stone vessel displayed signs of weathering and wear. Every feature called for interventions that necessitated ongoing dedication and generous financing. The difficulties of upholding continental design amid a subtropical setting grew ever clearer. Substances that thrived in drier European environs broke down swiftly in Miami's moist, briny atmosphere. Sculpted masonry by Calder wore away. Stucco surfaces flaked, timber decayed, ironwork rusted. All components demanded upkeep far more often than equivalents in milder zones. Tropical tempests posed an endless hazard. The 1960 storm cycle unleashed inundations. Hurricane Andrew in 1992 inflicted severe harm to the grounds and structures. Hurricane Irma in 2017 unleashed record tidal surges that submerged parts of the site. Each event demanded urgent fixes and sparked debates over the sustainability of maintaining old-world aesthetics in such an exposed spot. Nevertheless, Vizcaya gained from rising esteem for cultural conservation and design legacies. In 1994, it earned status as a National Historic Landmark, the pinnacle of honors for sites of historical note. This accolade conferred distinction and aided in securing resources, while also enforcing rigorous standards for any repairs or alterations. The National Trust for Historic Preservation flagged Vizcaya among America's 11 most imperiled heritage sites in 2008, spotlighting risks from nearby skyscraper plans and persistent dangers from gales and rising oceans. The spotlight spurred action, but also underscored the fragility of Vizcaya's position. Resources for renewal and care flowed from diverse channels. Miami-Dade County supplied core running costs, but these fell short of the full scope for protection. Government aid via initiatives like Save America's Treasures bolstered targeted efforts. Philanthropists, among them heirs of the Deering lineage, backed safeguarding initiatives. The Vizcaya Museum and Gardens Trust, founded in 1998, assumed duties for solicitation and promotion. Key renewal initiatives targeted the gravest issues. The stone barge received reinforcement to halt additional sculptural breakdown by Calder. The authentic etched motifs were ultimately extracted and swapped with copies, safeguarding the true pieces in climate-managed vaults while upholding the vessel's visual integrity. Room refurbishments prioritized areas with the richest ornamental schemes, meticulously upholding Chaffin's concept, while adapting them for exhibit purposes. The landscapes posed unique obstacles. Suarez's foundational layout demanded laborious tending that strained exhibit finances. The humid surroundings fueled an unrelenting fight against encroaching flora. The choice to efforts to upkeep the gardens adopted an approach that evoked their initial essence without striving for the flawless standards James had insisted upon. This balanced solution retained the core layout while recognizing real-world constraints. The pressures of climate change have intensified the hurdles in safeguarding the site. Elevating oceans endanger Vizcaya's coastal position. Harsher tempests challenge the estate's durability. The stone barge, having weathered 100 years of tropical cyclones, now endures greater strain from escalating storm frequency and ferocity. Sustaining it over the long haul might demand adaptive measures unforeseen by James and his architects. Advancements in tech have supplied innovative aids for conservation. High-res 3D imaging has captured the stone barge with remarkable precision, generating virtual blueprints to inform upcoming repairs, regardless of ongoing physical decay. Immersive VR experiences let guests explore delicate areas off-limits to foot traffic. Online repositories safeguard records that illuminate the architect's original vision. Over the years, Vizcaya's role as a museum has transformed significantly. It began mainly as a home exhibit illustrating the lifestyle of an affluent art enthusiast, but explanations now encompass the workforce behind such grand properties, the ecological obstacles of constructing in a humid locale, and the intricate societal undercurrents of Gilded Age fortunes. The narrative shared is deeper and fuller than mere praise for James Daring's triumphs. Nowadays, the property draws more than 200,000 guests each year, ranking among Miami's top cultural draws. Educational tours for students delve into building styles and past events. Academics investigate ornamental crafts and garden planning. Sightseers snap photos of the stone barge and grounds. Various gatherings, from musical performances to matrimonial ceremonies, bring in funds for upkeep while keeping Vizcaya connected to modern crowds. Still, conflicts persist between safeguarding and utilization. Each guest inflicts subtle erosion. Each function poses hazards to sensitive surfaces. Each tweak for operational needs subtly alters the authentic blueprint. Balancing these clashes demands ongoing dialogue among rival priorities: conservation, learning, openness, and economic viability. Vizcaya's influence reaches far past its tangible structures. The residents shaped American perspectives on design, proving that old-world elegance could thrive in novel environments. It illustrated that dedicated collecting and sponsorship could flourish in unexpected settings. It affirmed that safeguarding, despite its costs and complexities, can rescue invaluable artistic legacies. For Miami in particular, Vizcaya symbolized the cultural validation the city had long sought. This wasn't some outpost or mere vacation spot. It was a hub drawing refined fortunes and fostering elite architecture. Vizcaya bestowed upon Miami the artistic standing that bolstered its identity amid expansion into a bustling urban center. James Daring's aspiration to craft a revivalist villa in a balmy haven surpassed his wildest expectations. He envisioned Vizcaya enduring beyond his lifetime, and it has for a full century thus far. He aimed to foster splendor that would enhance existence, and it persists in doing so, albeit for multitudes of everyday explorers instead of a solitary gentleman. Upholding Vizcaya highlights the potential when societies dedicate themselves to defending historic treasures. The manor ought to have been razed generations back. The finances never added up, the obstacles loomed large, yet sufficient advocates deemed this remarkable gem worth rescuing. And via persistent dedication and funding, Vizcaya prevailed. Today, the estate endures, not in the pristine form James envisioned as that ideal faded long ago, but in a form potentially more profound, a symbol that aesthetic value warrants the struggle. That historic assets merit defense, no matter the expense or toil, and that the aspirations of a single affluent individual can, with diligence and resolve, benefit eras of strangers. Vizcaya's prospects stay unpredictable. Global warming, budget strains, and inevitable aging all imperil its existence. But at present, the seaside fortress holds firm. James Dering's fantastical blueprint brought to life and guarded amid formidable challenges. A revivalist palace in steamy Miami that defies logic, yet persists. Proof of what drive, discernment, and means can accomplish when fused with foresight and tenacity. In 1914, a prosperous single man facing health woes resolved to erect an Italianate residence amid Miami's untamed expanses. The notion appeared ridiculous from a sensible viewpoint. Nevertheless, 8 years on, Vizcaya rose finished, a revivalist palace deemed unfeasible. Forged via foresight, wealth, and the conviction that allure outweighs utility, James Dering savored his masterpiece for scarcely 5 years before passing on a vessel traversing the Atlantic. The imbalance is profound. 15 years devoted to design and construction for barely a decade of personal enjoyment, yet that may well define monumental artistic endeavors. They devour the time and energy of their makers, outlive them, and fulfill roles far beyond the creator's initial dreams. Vizcaya has surpassed James by a full century. The residence has withstood tempests that razed inferior structures. It persisted through long periods of abandonment, as uncertainty lingered over handling a Renaissance villa amid Miami's subtropical setting. It adapted to the shift from secluded haven to public exhibit, from a refined gentleman's sanctuary to a bustling attraction drawing hundreds of thousands of guests each year. The property James fashioned weaves numerous tales. It speaks to opulence and the feats money can accomplish when paired with discerning refinement. It captures the clash of old-world elegance and new-world drive, manifested in coral stone and lush foliage along Biscayne Bay. It embodies a single individual's resolve to craft splendor without concession, heedless of practicality or place. Yet, Vizcaya whispers grimmer narratives too, ones tied to the entitlement that enabled one man to mobilize 10% of Miami's workforce for his personal dwelling. To the toil, largely by black Bahamian laborers, that rendered such grand estates feasible. To the bold imposition of continental rigidity upon a wild tropical terrain. To the fragility of existences dependent on vast retinues of staff and endless supplies just for upkeep. Safeguarding Vizcaya reflects a deliberate decision by Miami on priorities. The mansion might have been torn down, financial pressures pointed that way, but sufficient voices championed its rarity as worth the cost and challenge of rescue. That verdict underscores a commitment to artistry and legacy, even amid the weight they carry. Paul Chalfin, James's most trusted partner, outlived his companion by 2 more decades. He stayed tied to Vizcaya, guiding efforts in upkeep and renewal. Still, the estate sans James likely seemed unfinished. They had forged it as a duo, their shared ideals turned tangible over prolonged teamwork. Chalfin mourned not merely a benefactor, but the soul who grasped his artistic yearnings most profoundly. The stone vessel still emerges from Biscayne Bay. Calder's works endure the elements, holding firm. The barrier keeps safeguarding the coastline, true to its blueprint. The manicured grounds evoke their former glory, though replicating James's exacting care proves unattainable. The rooms hold on to the essence Chalfin instilled, now paced by sightseers instead of a sophisticated host and his circle. Shifting climate patterns imperil Vizcaya's longevity in unforeseen manners. Swelling waters encroach upon the sea barrier. Fiercer storms challenge the site's endurance. The very balmy locale that lured James for wellness now endangers his constructed marvels. Conservation grows ever more intricate and costly amid evolving threats. Nevertheless, Vizcaya persists. Not in the pristine form James bequeathed, that ideal faded long since, but as an entity potentially even more precious. Proof that ingenuity can yield stunning elegance, that traditions merit defense, and that societies opt to uphold significance over opting for erasure. The unmarried man who erected Vizcaya sired no heirs. His inheritance lies not in blood, but in brick and mortar. The villa serves as his enduring tribute, more articulate than any offspring in revealing James Dering's essence and principles. Each guest strolling the patios, exploring the chambers, or capturing the stone barge in images helps sustain that heritage. Vizcaya Museum and Gardens now fulfills learning roles James hadn't envisioned yet might have valued. Pupils absorb lessons in design, creativity, and the past. Experts delve into Gilded Age society and ornamental crafts. The grounds operate as study space, workshop, and spark for emerging minds uncovering the heights attainable when foresight aligns with means. Vizcaya prompts an eternal query: what merits our creation, safeguarding, and esteem? James responded by fashioning a Renaissance retreat in an improbable spot, lavishing riches to manifest his ideal. Miami replied by rescuing the structure when ruin loomed certain. Every era must confront fresh iterations, weighing if Vizcaya's allure warrants the perpetual dedication to its care. At present, the reply holds affirmative. The edifice remains upright, the plantings flourish, the stone barge parts the surf as it has for more than 100 years. Throngs come, absorb splendor improbable in steamy Miami, and depart transformed by James Deering's audacious fantasy brought to life. The seaside fortress abides, a Renaissance palace that scorned reason, braved gales and disuse, and persists in affirming that aesthetics hold worth, that foresight can triumph. Challenges, demonstrating how a lone, resolute, unmarried man's endeavor, crafted to enhance his personal world, can, through diligent upkeep, benefit myriad strangers who never crossed his path, yet cherish his legacy. The Vizcaya belonging to James Deering embodies proof that the remarkable becomes attainable when individuals summon the courage to pursue it. It underscores the need to safeguard cultural gems even amid the strains they impose, and reveals how superb designs surpass their originators to embrace unforeseen functions, ones that might have delighted the builders to behold realized.